Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Avery Digital Classroom. I am Courtney Hicks, one of the public programming and outreach coordinators here at the Avery Research Center, and we are so happy to have you back with us here at the Avery Digital Classroom. This week is unique in its own right. We are having Black Women's Warrior Week. So a little bit of detail about Black Women Warrior Week. Here at the Avery, we like to celebrate a lot of unsung heroes and people who have been doing amazing work in our community. Therefore, we wanted to highlight a lot of Black women in our community who not only show expertise in their area of interest, but also have been doing amazing work. So make sure that you are tuning in to all of our wonderful events that we have. Some will be on Microsoft Teams and some will be on Instagram. So if you aren't already following us on Instagram, please do so at Avery Research Center. And tomorrow we'll be actually having an event with the alum of the College of Charleston, Dr. Ebony Hilton, who was the first anesthesiologist, the first Black anesthesiologist at MUSC. And she will be going a little bit over health disparities in terms of COVID-19 and Black maternal deaths that concern Black women with us tomorrow on Instagram Live. That will be hosted by our wonderful undergraduate assistant, Miss Adia Bennett. So tonight's event is one that I'm truly looking forward to. It's our Black Women's Educator event with Dr. Kameelah Martin. So Dr. Martin, if I do say so myself, was one of my favorite professors at the college. So it's been a really huge honor for me to actually have her on this event and present her with the wonderful, amazing information that she's going to give us here tonight. One of our other undergraduate assistants, Miss Anaya Wah, actually did create this event, and you all will get to talk to her a little bit later on this evening as she will present the Q&A portion for tonight. So before we get started, I'm going to go ahead and read Dr. Martin's bio, and then we're going to head straight into our event. If you aren't already connected to us on social media, make sure you're following us on Instagram at Avery Research Center, on Twitter at Avery Tweets, and on Facebook at Avery Research Center. Dr. Kameelah Martin was raised in a military family and has lived all over the United States, including Omaha, Nebraska, Little Rock, Arkansas, North Hollywood, California, Atlanta, Georgia, as well as Okinawa, Japan. She completed high school in Albany, Georgia, then entered Georgia Southern University as a first-generation college student. Graduating cum laude with a BA in English in December 2000, her fear of corporate workforce compelled her to pursue a career in higher education following her undergrad years. She went on to earn a master's degree in Afro-American Studies from the University of California, Los Angeles in 2003. Moving directly into a doctoral program, Dr. Martin earned her final degree in English from Florida State University in 2006. Her area of focus is 20th century African American literature with an emphasis in folklore and more specifically, the African American conjuring tradition. Her dissertation earned the FSU Department of English J. Russell Reber Award for Outstanding Dissertation in American Literature or Folklore. Dr. Martin's research explores the lore cycle of conjure women or Black priestesses as an archetype in literature and visual text. In 2013, Paul Grave Macmillan published her first monograph, Conjuring Moments in African American Literature, Women, Spirit Work, and Other Such Hoodoo, which engages how African American authors have shifted, recycled, and reinvented the conjure woman figure, primarily in the 20th century fiction. Dr. Martin is also the author of Envision Black Women Voodoo Aesthetics, African Spirituality in American Cinema, which explores the treatment of the priestess's figure in American cinema. Other areas of interest include the evolution of 20th century Black folklore heroes, the fiction of Tina McElroy, Ansa, Gullah Geechee heritage and culture, African American genealogy research, and the writing of family histories. Dr. Martin is a member of College Language Association, Modern Language Association, and the African American Historical and Genealogical Society. She is the newly appointed assistant editor of the College Language Association Journal and has published in studies in the literary imagination, Black women, gender, and families, as well as the African American National Biography. She has edited special issues of Genealogy, South Atlantic Review, a forthcoming issue of Hypata. She is a co-editor with Dr. Kenitra D. Brooks of the Lemonade Reader. She is a member of Zeta Phi Beta Sorority Incorporated and the mother of a precious son and recently a daughter named for the youngest sister of Nato Syke, Shange, Saffras, Cyprus, and Indigo. She has held faculty positions at Georgia State University, the University of Houston, and Savannah State University. She is currently Director and Professor of African American Studies at the College of Charleston. And without further ado, I would like to go ahead and hand it over to my dear colleague and friend, Dr. Martin.
Thank you, Courtney. Such a wonderful introduction. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. I would first like to extend my appreciation to both Courtney, who I might add is an African American Studies alum here at the college, but also Anayawa, who is an African American Studies minor. Shout out to African American Studies, and just encourage them to continue doing the great work that they're doing over at Avery. All right, so let's jump into it. So I was tasked with talking about the impact of Black women on education. And if we'll go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So I want to start by actually first posing a question, right? What does it actually mean to be educated, right? Whose definition are we working with here when we think about this, particularly in terms of Black women? And so depending on your cultural leanings, this might mean different things, right? In more Western cultures, you know, education is condensed into a very formal, institutionalized instruction, complete with diplomas and degrees and all those such things. But in other non-Western societies, informal education is just as critical to one's entrance and movement in the world. And if we think back to a not so distant time, you know, we might recall hearing our elders say, you know, don't be no educated fool, right? That there are some of us who have book sense, but ain't got sense, right? And so we might refer to this body of informal knowledge as mother wit, home training, folklore, intuition. Both the formal and informal forms of education or these streams of knowledge carry, I think, an equal amount of weight. But I want to privilege the informal education that we receive in our other ways of knowing tonight. So on the first slide, you'll see a very interesting African proverb here. And I open with this because I think it really illustrates what I'm trying to get at tonight, right? So it basically says, you know, that if you educate a woman, you educate a nation, right? And I would like to open I like to open with this quote to underscore Black women's central role in educating their communities, right? Because when you're educating a woman, a Black woman, that education gets dispersed out into the community rather than just staying with the individual, right? And so I'd like to start by illustrating exactly how this works in some of the traditional African societies. Next slide, please. So perhaps you have heard of the griot or the jelly tradition, wherein a young man usually inherits his role as a griot from his father, who inherited from his father, who inherited from his father, right? The griot is an African term. A griot is a master storyteller, simply. He's a master storyteller, a historian, a performer, if you will. His role is to record orally, right? We're talking about oral societies here, the political and genealogical history of his village through song, through musicianship, through his access to cultural knowledge. For instance, the Sunjata, an old epic of Mali, is one such story that we get transmitted this way, orally, through the griot tradition. And before it was put into print, the epic of Sunjata was passed down, was transmitted orally through the griot tradition for over 700 years. Right? But here's the thing. Women were not part of this griot tradition. Traditionally speaking, women cannot serve as griots in traditional African societies. But be sure that women had their own storytelling and oral traditions that served a different function. So here I have a map of Sierra Leone, and it kind of breaks down the ethnic groups. And I want to point out the Mende in particular, right? In the modern Mende and Hausa society, Hausa found in various places in West Africa, but particularly this group that I'm thinking of is in northern Nigeria. They felt as though, the oral tradition or storytelling, right, was too dignified for men. That was women's work. They thought about gossip and really trivialized, the oral traditions that were shared among women. And these were also polygamous societies, right? So there would be one man who would have multiple wives, right? And so these wives would live in a compound, they would raise their children together. And they also did not believe that a woman, right, if you were a man and you were to show how successful you were with your agriculture or what have you, it was a privilege to have your women, your wives, stay inside, right? So they didn't go outdoors, right? They weren't seen outdoors as some sort of status symbol, right? And so what we have happening is that the women, right, they're mothering each other, right? They're creating community amongst each other. We have the senior wife, we have the others who fall in line according to marital status, and there's a range of ages there, but we also have the children that come from that union, right? And so what we see happening is that these wives, right, are incorporating the storytelling into their mothering, into their nurturing, into their ministering, right, of this women's community. Right. And so we think about the function of storytelling, right? And here I'm about to put on my scholarly hat for a second, right? And talk about the function of the folktale, right? Traditionally, we think about telling folktales, the purpose of telling folktales, the function of telling folktales in three distinct ways, right? There are three purposes, right? Folktales either instruct, right? They teach you something, right? They are explanatory. They explain how things came to be in the world, or they're entertaining, right? And so when we think about this, we see how easily it becomes for women, right, to share these oral traditions, to tell stories, right, to use the terminology there. But they're also teaching the children how to behave in society, what things are acceptable to them. They're teaching each other how to be good wives, right? How to care for their bodies, right? And so you start to see this transmission of informal, right? Informal knowledge spreading among not just the women, right? But also the children that they are raising, right? Both the young men and the young women, right? Until they come of a certain age, and then their education into being young adults, according to their gender, takes precedent. Right. So that's just one example of how we really see what it means that when you educate a woman, you are really educating a nation. Next slide, please. Thank you. So Valerie Lee, in her pivotal study of the complex role of the midwife, titled Granny Midwives and Black Women Writers, argues that Black women, particularly those who adapted to and are descended from a history of bondage, are cultural bearers in this regard, right? She thinks about these acts of telling and teaching, and raising children and birthing children, right? And she thinks about all of the women's work that goes into that. And she talks about women, Black women in particular, being the cultural bearers, right? And so this is kind of, I hope you can kind of follow where I'm going with this, right? And so I'm arguing tonight that these women, Black women, are our most revered educators, right? And I know that we tend to place more value on formalized education, and we want to think about who was the first woman to get a PhD and who did this and who did that in terms of Western society, right? But I want us to peel those layers back just a bit and really focus on what Black women are doing, the everyday Black women, right, are doing every day in their homes in terms of being educators, right? In a lot of ways, they become our very first teachers, right? And so Valerie Lee talks about, she coins this phrase, Sister Conjurer, right? She argues that it's through the cultural icon of Sister Conjurer that our communities have witnessed the adaptation and preservation of cultural knowledge, ranging from character building, caring for the land, cultural rituals, spirit work, and a very African-based epistemology, right? And so I offer for us a new framework for understanding the invaluable work, cultural work that Black women do as educators. Next slide, please. So who is Sister Conjurer, right? And I know that many of us are joining virtually from Low Country, South Carolina, so I don't have to explain to you who Sister Conjurer is, right? But for those of you who may be less familiar with this terminology or this figure in the community, just a few highlights here, right? I think first and foremost, when I think about Sister Conjurer or conjure women or midwives, and they can take a number of titles, right? But I think first and foremost, we have to remember that and think about the fact that healing is a sacred duty for them, right? So we're talking about the midwives who birthed maybe our mamas and grandmamas, or perhaps some of us who are listening, right? But they also served as spiritual advisors, right? They were often the moral authority in terms of the community. And they had a very particular relationship with the natural environment, right? They moved in and out of the natural world to do their work, right? But they maintained this spiritual balance, right? Between taking from the earth, taking of the earth, right? But also giving back and making sure that they're not overusing the environment, right? Most of these conjuring figures, right, had a syncretic relationship wherein they practice conjure and they practice Christ, right? That those two things were not mutually exclusive, right? And I have a quote that kind of sent people reeling when Beyonce dropped her Lemonade album, right? I plug my mentees with pages from the good book, right? And there, I think it really gives a prime example of kind of the merging of these very syncretic African traditions, but also bringing in the Christian tradition as well, okay? And they're revered among the community, okay? Next slide, please. So I'm developing with my colleague, Kenitra Brooks and Lakeisha Simmons. Kenitra's at Michigan State University. Lakeisha Simmons is at the University of Michigan. We are working on building this new theoretical concept that we are calling Conjure Feminism, right? And we're using this to kind of talk about, to articulate what I'm talking about when I think about Black women and all of the spirit work and healing work that they do as educators. And so I want to just kind of set this up for you a little bit and share what I'm thinking in terms of Black women and the work that they do. So first and foremost, Conjure Feminism privileges African diasporic women's knowledge and folklore practices of spirit work, healing, herbalism, gardening, midwifery, and the like. We're arguing that Conjure Feminism provides and has provided Black folks the fluidity necessary to survive and thrive in a world that wants to kill you, right? We recognize the divine feminine and the natural environment as consorts from which Black women are pulling their intuition, their second sight, their gifted hands, their rituals, that all of these things are working together to create what we think of as a type of activism, right? Conjure feminism is activism, right? It is ensuring the survival of a people, right? It is a freedom practice, if you will. And there are many cases, and I'm not going to go into the history, right? But do your research. I got the receipts, right? There are many cases wherein Sister Conjurer did literally get people free, right? Ask your Haitian friends about it. Conjure feminism is community empowerment, right? When we think about what's going on right now with COVID-19 and the pandemic, think about all of the work, the attention, right, now that gardening is getting, and people growing their own food and learning about herbal remedies, because we probably ain't gonna have access to those experimental drugs that your boy 45 has, right? So we got to do what we've always done, right? And go to the woods and go find us some life everlasting and make it do what it do, right? So it's empowerment. It's empowerment, right? It's allowing the community to take command of their own health and well-being. It's a means to do that. Conjure feminism is ancient wisdom, right? It's passed down through experiential learning, through the oral transmissions, through inherited lineages, right? And I think it's important also to emphasize that learning, right, as we're thinking about education, right, and these Black women as educators, the learning doesn't stop when grandma or great grandma, when her physical body, right, is no longer with us, right? Because conjure feminism, understanding these other ways of knowing, as Toni Morrison calls them, recognizes that even in the spirit world, right, we are still able to learn from and hear our ancestors and allow them, if we're open enough to it, allow them to guide us and still teach us, right? Teach us even more from beyond the grave, right? And again, I know you low country folks know what I'm talking about, right? Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. And so I want to also talk about some of our historic figures, right? Because we're talking about Black women educators, and I feel as though I need to at least acknowledge some historical figures, right? And because we do have them, right? And we're not talking about historical in the sense of Anna Julia Cooper, right? And the wonderful work and legacy that she left behind, right? That's documented, right? And that's not a slight against Sister Anna Julia Cooper, right? But what I want to talk about is Tituba of the Salem witch trials. I want to talk about Queen Nanny of the Jamaican Maroons. I want to talk about Madame Marie Laveau of New Orleans, who is said to have lived almost a full century and then was reborn to live another century, right? Some say Marie Laveau never died, right? I want to talk about Queen Mother Ya Asantewa, who came out of the Asante ethnic group in what we now know as Ghana, right? And who fought tooth and nail against the British to protect the golden stool, right? And so these are the pictures that I have on the screen here. And so these are our foremothers. These are those who we look up to in terms of conjure feminism and some of our most revered educators, right? But I think it's also important to recognize that we have everyday people still working, still doing this work, right? In 2020, we have mamas and grandmamas and aunties and madrinas and mambos and santeras who are still doing this work and ensuring that the legacy gets passed on. Here in the Low Country, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about Queen Quet and the work that she's doing. And I was recently hipped to Sister Akua Page, co-founder of the Geechee Experience. And apparently I didn't know, but it is Hoodoo Heritage Month here in the Low Country. Can I get an amen about that? I mean, so don't be fooled into thinking that just because this is ancient wisdom, that it's gone and passed, right? We are still actively working on this. We are still actively producing. We are still actively disseminating this knowledge. Next slide, please. So why Black women, right? We know that conjuring is not necessarily exclusively a women's art, right? Or a Black woman's art. We know that there are other ethnic groups that come with their own sacred wisdom, and we honor that, right? I think there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. You know, conjure feminism as a concept, I think it's important to note that it does absolutely and unapologetically, right, privilege Black women as the source and site of this body of knowledge, but it does not exclude other members of the community, right? Black men also have their own ancient wisdoms and practices that they inherit. And furthermore, you know, when we're talking about empowerment and doing for the community, right, we're talking about Black women's ministry that is inclusive to the entire community, right? So we talking about, you know, making sure that you know, the young groom is healthy enough to produce another child, right? We are talking about watching over the mama, right, while she is in gestation, right, to make sure that child makes it safely into the world, right? And so along the lines of Alice Walker's definition of womanism, right, conjure feminism and Sister Conjurer is here to ensure the survival and wholeness of the entire community, right, regardless of gender descriptions, right? However, women do hold a particular point of privilege in the epistemologies that inform conjure feminism. Next slide, please. So I want to go to Sister and my soror, Zora Neale Hurston, and read a quote that from her book, Tell My Horse, where she goes to Jamaica and Haiti, and she does some folklore collections of her own, right? And so I'll just read this to you quickly. What is truth? Dr. Holly asked me. And knowing that I could not answer him, he answered himself through a voodoo ceremony in which the mambo, that is the priestess, richly dressed, is asked this question ritualistically. She replies by throwing back her veil and revealing her sex organs. The ceremony means that this is the infinite, the ultimate truth. There is no mystery beyond the mysterious source of life, right? And so what I think Hurston is trying to articulate is that women, right, because of their physical ability to pass life through a portal, right, the birth canal, they embody a spiritual portal through which the spirit, through which the divine can move between worlds, right? To use a metaphor from the Vodou tradition, the woman is the potomitan, right? Or the gateway, the portal through which spirit moves in and out of the temple, right? And so when we think about Black women, right, you might say that Black women literally have spirit on the main line, right? And so I want us to recognize that while I'm not excluding men from these traditions and these healing practices, I am privileging what Black women do, because I think there is something very specific about what Black women do for the community and through their bodies in order to sustain the community. Next slide, please. All right, so what the heck am I talking about, right? What is this conjure feminism? What is it? Oh, I thought, you know, Black women in education, I thought we would just kind of take a look at the areas of specialization in which Sister Conjurer has earned her PhD, right? And I want to walk you through some very specific examples of what I'm talking about, right? Some of the things that many of us have grown up learning and perhaps didn't even recognize that this was sacred knowledge, or didn't really think about the impact of being a recipient of this knowledge, right? So I have a couple of categories that I'll touch on: midwifery and healing, spirit work, mothering, foodways, and mother wit. All right, so let's jump right into the next slide: midwifery and healing and root medicine. So this first picture on the left is one of my ancestors, right? I am doing ancestral work as I'm sharing this with you, so let's be very clear about that, right? Her name is Rosetta Cooper. She was born about 1812 in Williamsburg County, South Carolina. Knowledge that I did not come across until about maybe 6 years ago. So I was delighted to learn that I am just a skip away from where she walked the earth. And so I have not been able to quite verify this yet. But according to one of the stories my aunt told me before she passed away, is that we had an ancestor who was significant in some way because she was recognized for her midwifery skills. And there's a picture of her in her midwife's uniform, and she was recognized across the state. And she didn't know the name of this ancestor, but she remembered that she had seen this picture. And years later, I came across this picture in my research, and I only recently figured out that just maybe this is the picture she was talking about. And so I present that to you, just out of respect to her memory and her legacy and what she has passed on to me. And then I also have on the other side is a picture of myself and what I like to call my personal doula and healer, also my best friend. When we think about these legacies, these traditions, I want us again to be clear that these are living legacies, right? And Mother Rosetta there, she is among those foremothers that we kind of praise and pay homage to, right? But we also have healers right here among us, and the mothering and the healing that I have received in my lifetime hasn't always come from elders, right? Sometimes they're our peers. And so if you'll indulge me, I want to talk a little bit about Sister Daia here in terms of what we learn, right? How women educate us, right? Particularly in the realm of healing, right? So I talked a little bit about prenatal care, so I won't harp on that, right? But more recently, I learned about this ritual, right? Called closing the bones, that has everything to do with ensuring that once a woman has successfully given birth, right, that all the care, right, the physical care, but also the spiritual care is taken to make sure that her body is closed, right, that portal that we're talking about, it is closed spiritually, and so that it can heal physically, right? And it's so funny because I have a 2-year-old, Indigo is her name. And I swear she had to be like 11 months old. And I went home to visit my folks and one of my elders, it was cold, it was nippy. And she said, make sure you put something around your neck. Your body is still open. And I heard her, but I didn't quite understand what she meant until I learned more about this ritual of closing the bones, right? And so, these are things that we've lost sight of, I'll say, right? And I think it's really important to reclaim some of that information, some of these rituals, right? Newborn care, breastfeeding, remedies, things that I've implied, right? But I want to connect that to this experience that I had with Sister Daia, right? Me and Sister Daia have been together a long time, We have known each other since we were 18 years old. We went to Georgia Southern together. We became women together, right? So when I had my first child, as many of you who have had your first child know, I didn't know what I was doing, right? He was born on an Easter Sunday, and no one was around in that hospital because it was Easter Sunday. Not the lactation specialist, not anybody who knew anything about me and my milk that I was determined to give to my son. Long story short, they send me home in a couple of days. I get home. I don't know what I'm doing. And my breast becomes so engorged that there's literally like the nipple is literally flat. I was in pain. My mother, my grandmother, they had never breastfed. They didn't have this information, right? They didn't know how to help me. Sister Daya came, and I don't know how she knew, right? But she was able to coach me through that, right? And in the 3 or 4 days that I had been home and unable to give my son, right, milk, she came with her magic hands and figured out how to get my milk to come down so that I was no longer in pain, and more importantly, that I could feed my child, right? So I learned about breastfeeding and taking care of my postpartum body through this woman who is actually younger than me, right? And so I just want to emphasize that this is a living legacy. We are constantly in contact with other women who, you know, if they are educated and they have received the knowledge, then they are willing to share, right? And so I have to pay homage to her too, because she also mothered me. She ministered to me, right? And so she is my personal conjure lady, if you will. So shout out to Sister Daya. Next slide, please. And where are we with time? Okay, I'm gonna run through this real quick. All right, so we can get to questions. All right, so the next area is spirit work. What do I mean there? I mean ancestor reverence. I'm talking about funeral rites. You know, we have these very elaborate funerals, right? We have to dress a certain way. We have to do certain things, right? For the actual funeral, but there are other rites that also have to happen as well, right? And sometimes we know, sometimes we just do them because they've always been done, right? But engaging in that work, because again, right, the learning, the legacy doesn't stop just because someone is no longer with us physically, right? Spirit possession, I want to talk about that, right? Because I think it's really important to understand that spirit possessions, and you know, I came to this through talking to another spiritualist sister, and we were talking about, she was asked the question about spirit possession and if she had ever experienced it, and you know, she challenged that and said, you know, we have to think differently about spirit possession. Yes, sometimes spirits actually come through your body, right, and use you as a vessel. But spirit possession might be, you know, an elder coming to you in a dream and giving you a message. Spirit possession might be, you know, you having this thought that comes out of your mouth and you're like, well, wait, I wasn't really thinking that, but I said it, but I'm not really sure where it came from, right? So there are a lot of different ways to engage in spirit possession or communication with the dead, right? That if we allow it to, will really lead us, right, in the direction that we are supposed to go, right? The lavete, the head washing, right? Making sure that you're doing these rituals so that you do have a clear, clean head, right? So that you can have a direct communication with your ancestors, with the spirits that you're working with, right? We could talk all day about Black Atlantic religious, right? I'm just going to put that there and move along. Root working, right? And not the kind, you know, that we gonna use to heal us from COVID-19. I'm talking about the other stuff, right? I would be remiss if I said it didn't exist, right? We have to acknowledge that too, because sometimes when people do us wrong and we have no other remedies, then we got to make us a remedy, right? And then the power of prayer, right? Black folks always talking about the power of prayer, right? That is spirit work. Right. So these are examples of some of the things that these Black women educators, right, have given us, right? They have passed down these legacies. Next slide. All right. Mothering. We'll run through this quickly, right? So menstruation rituals, how to care for your body, body image, personal care, rites of passage for both young men and young women, conception, how to make sure that you are right, your body is right when you are ready to conceive a child, but also how to make sure that if you ain't ready, you don't conceive a child, right? And again, just having conversations, talking to people, right? Something as simple as learning how your cycle works, right? No witchcraft, no spirit work there, right? But just understanding your body. And sometimes, I think we often take that for granted. But if you don't understand the rhythm of your body, if you don't understand how to count them days, if you don't understand how to read your body, then you ain't gonna understand, when you're in that fertile window and how to avoid that, right? Like that is part of the learning, right? Food ways. Oh man, so I really want to emphasize food as ancestral memory. Like that's something that I'm really thinking on lately, right? Thinking about these recipes and watching, having a lifetime of watching my mother and grandmother and aunts cook in the kitchen and being able to do that, right? Just from memory, right? From watching them, but also understanding that the taste of something or the smell of something can open up other ancestral memories, right? Whether it's of grandma who's no longer with us, or whether it's another elder whose name you can't even call, but made sure that this particular recipe or this way of preparing okra, right, or gumbo, was preserved and passed down, right? So there's ancestral work even in the food that we eat, right, in the way that we prepare our food, right? Food is healing, food is social currency, gardening and agriculture. Next slide, please. And then the other one is, the last one is mother wit, right? And I think, we talk about these proverbs, we are a people who have our way with words, right? And we may not teach our children things directly, right? But it's all in what you say. And I'll share this and then I'll move along. I remember when I was about 12 years old, I had revealed myself to be a little bit thick in the thighs, right? A little shapely for my age. And I was having some issues with why I was so curvy and why the other young ladies around me were not. And I think I said something aloud, and my mother, who was folding laundry, didn't skip a beat, didn't question what I was saying. I was just rambling, and she was over there folding laundry, and she said, "Don't nobody want a bone but a dog," right? And she didn't have to say nothing else after that. I closed my mouth. I thought on it for a minute. I was like, yeah. And I never have another issue with my body and accepting it for the way that it was and understanding that it was beautiful, right? So even the words that we speak have impact, right? But also the words we don't speak. All right, so intuition, dream interpretations. Like, how do we know that if you dream of fish, somebody's pregnant? Like, think about that for a minute. Like, who taught you that? Who taught you that? Think about that, right? Reading signs, reading weather. And I just want to share one of my favorite new African-American proverbs. I'm just going to go ahead and add this to the list with Mother Harriet here. Don't argue with someone Mother Harriet would have left behind, right? And I know that's floating around social media, but it's one of my favorites. And so last slide, please. There we go. So tonight is really about celebrating the impact of Black women, the impact that Black women have had and continue to have on being the great educators of the people, right? Black women stay teaching us how to survive by relying on other ways of knowing, putting our ancient wisdoms to use to sustain the next generation. So it is my hope that I leave you recalling and remembering the Black women in your own lives who have taught you how to be in this world. If they are in the spirit realm, speak their name and let them know that they are not forgotten. And if they are still living, take a moment to give them honor and respect. Sit at her feet and continue to learn. Thank you.
And thank you, Dr. Martin. So good evening, everybody. As Courtney and Dr. Martin have both mentioned, my name is Anaya Waugh. I'm a current junior at the college, and I'm a double major in secondary education and English with a minor in African American studies. I'm so appreciative to be in this space with such influential and impressive Black women who I look to as mentors personally. As a young Black woman with areas of study in education and African American studies, I'm particularly passionate about the premise of tonight's events. As I know the legacy which Black women have left out for me. Specifically in these trying times, it's very important to uplift, to quote Brother Malcolm X, the most disrespected, unprotected, and neglected women in America. So Black Women Warrior Week is a necessary celebration, with warrior being defined by the Merriam-Webster Dictionary as a person engaged in some struggle or conflict. And as we know, Black women have borne the brunt of struggle and conflict that our community faces. So tonight especially, I wanted to take a moment to express gratitude to women in education, Dr. Martin specifically, and Black women in general as cultural educators. With that being said, and in that vein, I want to pose some questions to you, Dr. Martin, on behalf of all of us in the audience, after such an enriching conversation and presentation, because I want to delve more into some of those topics and applying them to today and the things that we're facing and going through. So my first question is, how has your academic background and area of study influenced your teaching style? And do you notice the historical tradition of storytelling manifested in your model of teaching?
Thank you for that question. Wow. Okay, so two intersections here. And then I'm gonna share with you all this light bulb moment that I've had in recent years that made everything make sense. So I'm gonna share y'all how I had a slow moment with all of this. So I came to this subject area two ways, actually. Through the literature, right? I'm a literary scholar, and I study Black women's literature. I recognized early on that there were all of these stories about these magical Black women, and I was just so drawn to it. My own maternal family comes out of New Orleans, and so there was a lot of kind of sensationalism around that I didn't quite even understand, right? I just knew that these women knew some things, and I didn't know how they knew or why they knew, but I recognized that it was something, right? And so through the spiritual side and the literature is how I came into my specific area of expertise and why I decided to study African spirituality and folklore. As for the storytelling, you know, in my head, I can already hear Sister Daia laughing at me, right? Because she says all the time, like, I think she eat Pac-Man. I was like, maybe in my 20s. And she was like, you are the griot. Like, you know you doing this work, right? And I didn't get it, right? I was reading the stories and trying to analyze the stories about the Black women and the folklore. And I'm also kind of, I guess, the folklorist in my family. I want to know who came from what and why we do this and this, that, and the other. And it just only recently did I come to the understanding that the work that I'm doing through my research, through my writing, through my teaching, that it is also spirit work, that by giving students, by introducing students to these traditions, whether it's through the literature or whether it's through the folklore, or I've had santeras come to class in previous at previous institutions, that I am setting them up, right, to do spirit work and to reclaim their ancestors and their understanding. And I didn't think about it like that for a long time until maybe like the last 6 years. And, you know, that's kind of like my, like, duh, like, and it's funny because I also hear my ancestors laughing at me like, yeah, we set you up to do this. Like, how did you not How did you not put that together? That this is your gift and this is how you continue the legacy through education. I never imagined myself as a storyteller. But I think as I get more comfortable in my teaching and understanding that this work is bigger than me, then I become more relaxed and I allow those traditions to come through. And so yeah, thank you for that.
Of course, thank you. So next question. I know you mentioned during your presentation Conjure Feminism showing up as activism, and I know notably Black women have been contributors to major social justice movements, specifically here in the United States. Do you see this as a manifestation of Conjure Feminism and as kind of the ancestors pushing their work through the current generation and generations that have passed?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that Black women are doing what Black women have always done. We're just seeing a contemporary version of it, right? We have always been at the forefront of revolution, of pushing and fighting for freedom, fighting for the survival of our people. Whether, you know, we sprinkle a little goof of dust, or, you know, throwing up the fist and fighting like Sister Angela Davis. And so I see it as an evolution of a type of conjure feminism, right? But I also think about, you know, when we think about particularly in its present iteration, and I should also say Black women have always been at the forefront of this, but we didn't always get the acknowledgement, right? We were always in the background, but we were doing the work. Let's be clear, right? And so I think what has changed now is that we are at the forefront, and, you know, we're saying enough is enough. We're saying you are killing our husbands and our fathers and our sons, and that doesn't just affect them; it affects the entire Black community. And so I think we're seeing Black women push forward in a more assertive way, because, you know, it's more socially acceptable. But I also think about, you know, what it takes in order for those Black women to be on the front lines, right? And I think about the care that they need, right, to be able to sustain that energy, to sustain the fight. And so, you know, while we see them, you know, in front of the cameras or in front of the picket lines or doing all these other things, right, we're also seeing this entire movement of Black women's healing, right? Black women's self-care, Black women mothering and nurturing each other as a way to make sure that we can make it through the next day. And so I see all of that as another part of conjure feminism. And I'll also say that something that the reason that conjure feminism even came up, it was at a retreat that Kenitra and I had as we were, you know, kind of giving birth to the idea of the lemonade reader. And what really struck us was that as we get to the end of Beyonce's Lemonade scenes, we start to see all of these Black women come to the plantation, reclaim that space, right? But they're laughing together. They are breaking bread together. They are healing together, right? And that was what was so powerful about that particular visual album, right? And so it was as though, you know, it resonated so deeply because we understood that all of this ancient wisdom, right, that had been passed on, we saw it manifest in Lemonade, right? And so it spoke to the particular experiences, and I understand that, okay, she was dealing with some other stuff, right? But it spoke beyond the infidelity in her marriage, right? It had a more universal, application. And so I think about the importance of Black women's community and healing together and making sure that we can stand another day to fight this fight.
Thank you for that insight. That was a really great answer. So my final question for you is, for those watching in the audience who want to gain some more information, insight into the topics that we covered tonight, what resources would you recommend to them? And then I know I'm currently in a really enriching course with you about African folklore and the diaspora. So do you know of any course offerings maybe in the upcoming semester that students can take advantage of if they're tuned in, or any resources in general that they can explore this topic more in depth and kind of learn how to be supporters of Black women as cultural bearers and educators?
Absolutely, I surely do. I would definitely tell students or others who are interested to take a look at Valerie Lee's book. Right, she really talks about storytelling. She really frames this idea of cultural bearers onto Black women writers. Right, she talks about storytelling in the traditional sense, but then moving to the page, right, and marrying that with Sister Conjurer and all of those things that come with that. And there are also my books. I mean, I've spent a lot of years researching and writing on this, and so while it is also in a literary context, and one is literature, one is film, I would definitely recommend, and not just because it's my work, but because I know how in depth I go into some of these issues, I would certainly recommend taking a look at either my first book or the second one. Conjuring Moments in African American Literature, and the second one is Envisioning Black Feminist Voodoo Aesthetics. And then lastly, I would also point students into maybe a couple other, oh, you asked about courses. So next semester, spring semester, I am teaching a course that is titled Studies in Black Feminism. And I am working on the reading list now, but in my mind, I am thinking the whole course is just going to be on Conjure Feminism, and to really kind of explore what that means and where we see it around us. So that is forthcoming in spring 2021.
I will definitely look into that course because it sounds really intriguing. So I want to thank you again, Dr. Martin, for your contributions tonight, your wonderful presentation. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I'm sure the audience members have as well. I wanted to plug really quickly. I know Courtney mentioned earlier that we are having an event tomorrow as a part of our week-long series for Black Women Warrior Week. And tomorrow's event will be specifically highlighting health disparities in the public health realm, and Black women and their interaction with that specifically. So we have our guest speaker, anesthesiologist, Dr. Harris, who is an alumna of the college as well. And to keep events like these coming from the Avery and events that we're having week long through our Black Women Warrior Week, we welcome donations through the Avery's website that you can visit online. And I just want to thank everyone again for tuning in. We thoroughly enjoyed our conversation with Dr. Martin, and these critical conversations are very important in highlighting and celebrating the women that contribute so much to our community. So thank you again, Dr. Martin, and have a good evening, everyone. Thank you for tuning in with us.